Martha was just going to share the online modules that we've been talking about for months and months. They've finally been finalised on Friday, and we're very excited. So just a quick few minutes, and then we'll start the day, if that's okay. So over to you, Martha.
Thanks, Sharon. Lovely to see everybody. I'm Martha Circum. I work 3 days a week with Sharon and Helen as a clinical lead across Wales for perinatal mental health. And I'm going to quickly share my screen. So as Sharon said, these were launched last week. So these modules have taken a while in preparation. I'll move to the English version because I'll be able to read it a little bit easier. So T-Dusky, ET-Dusky, which is HEIW's new learning platform, have now got these housed on their website. And the overall aim, obviously, is really to give everybody a bit of an introduction to perinatal and infant mental health across Wales. And these courses are open access for all practitioners working in health and social care. So that's really, really helpful. It's quite easy to just contact HEIW on this email, and we'll send this around probably in our next newsletter, but we'll also have a bit of a comms launch around it. But you're welcome to email them to set up an account. There's a sign-up process that you'll get this information through. But the courses are housed on this site. So these are just a bit of an overview. There's 7 core modules, and the competency and the training plan that sits on our website will really support you to see which ones might be more applicable for your roles, depending on which level you might work with families. So we're really excited about that and hoping as many as possible can access those and appreciate the learning opportunities. Thanks, Sharon.
Hey, that didn't take very long, did it? So, Ruth, are you happy? Shall we? I probably say this every time. Should we get the party started? Yeah. Yeah. So, can I introduce Ruth Wynne-Williams? And Ruth is Nursing Officer for Learning Disabilities in Welsh Government, and is going to give us a bit of an overview of the strategic direction of learning disability policy in Wales and the notion of parenting. So, over to you, Ruth.
Thank you. I think hopefully you can see the screen and the slides. You can, okay. Brilliant. So yeah, diolch I am gwahoddiad. So yeah, thanks for the invite, and it's great to see that learning disability is on your agenda. So that's a big plus for me, as I think it should be on everybody's agenda. So I've been asked to look at some strategic direction of the policy, and for me, it's about notion of parenting. You know, where do we draw those lines in the sand about support and enabling around about learning disability. So as Shannon said, I am the Learning Disability Nursing Officer in the Welsh Government for 2 days a week, and my other post is as a lecturer at Bangor University, and my background is, of course, a learning disability nurse. So those are the things we're going to do. We look at a little bit of policy and then understand that notion from the perspective of parents who have a learning disability or identify or labelled as a learning disability, and or parents giving birth to a child with a learning disability. So those two kind of things sit within our sphere of work as well as learning disability nurses. I just wanted to acknowledge to begin with, the difficulty we have is that, you know, we have lots of labels, and labels don't really tell you anything. They're socially constructed, they're value laden and political in some ways. And they're very much looking at a deficit module and medicalising people. So we try to work as individuals with people as individuals, and find that labels are not always useful. So in that case, we're looking at just parents, we're just looking at just children, rather than thinking about what does the learning disability mean. And I know Laura's going to talk a little bit after about learning disability, which I saw, so I won't kind of home on too much of it. But, you know, everybody has an equal chance in life for the best life possible. Doesn't matter what label you carry. And it's widely acknowledged now that more women with learning disability become mothers, and that's a result of social change and social practice from the 80s for, you know, giving people the right to ordinary life. So if we do that, you know, this is this is how it's going to be. It's going to be wonderful that we have all sorts of different people in our lives having children. It's proved really difficult to get any accurate estimates about parents with learning disability in Wales because of this definition issue. There's an increasing consensus that we need to describe what learning disability is, but we find that quite difficult because sometimes people get diagnosed really early and sometimes people don't. Some people go throughout life without a diagnosis, but you will meet mums and children of all sorts. But the Welsh Government uses a kind of a commonly recognised definition in trying to collect statistics and you know, trying to make a plan forward. So it's an impairment of intellectual function that significantly affects the way they develop and leads to some difficulties in understanding and using information, learning new skills, and managing your life independently. And it's that kind of similar, only three things. And it's that kind of definition we work with, but it's really difficult to get concrete information about that. So to look about some of the strategy, and these are really just on that group of people, the population around people we identify and label as having a learning disability. It's been 40 years since the last strategy. We haven't got a strategy since 1983, and it was the All Wales Mental Handicap Strategy at that point. And this was about ordinary lives, getting people to live in the community. And this was the last one. Pete Jones was a learning disability nurse and retired and an artist, and he has captured some of the lives of people who lived in those institutions that we closed due to this strategy in 83. And he has some fantastic portraits of people that you would have never seen in your life because they were locked away in hospitals. So if you get a chance, you know, have a look at some of his work, because it does give you a perspective of how we've changed. And that diagnosis of learning disability doesn't define the person. It doesn't tell you anything about that person. It doesn't tell you how learning disability impacts on their lives in different way. And it doesn't mean, you know, that, you know, it means that life can be challenging, but with the right support, people can achieve as a good well-being and a good life, which is what we want. So since the strategy, we have no specific strategy for LD, but we are working on the premises that I'm sure that you would know all the other policies. So one of the main one is this plan of long-term future vision, you know, the whole system approach to health and social care, and it's focused on health and well-being and preventing illness. So this has the core values of the NHS, you know, putting quality and safety above all else. And this is for everybody. So this includes people who learn disabilities. It includes everybody that we meet. So this is our cornerstone of that way we work at the moment. The other two things that really affects the way that we all work is the Wellbeing of Future Generation Act. It gives us a permission and ambition, you know, and a legal obligation to improve our social and cultural environment. It requires us to think about the long-term impact of our decisions, to work better with people and communities, and to look at those health inequalities. So this gives us some strengths behind that. It's unique to Wales, this act. And hopefully we're looking at positive changes. So again, you know, people with learning disabilities sit in that act, and we work towards that with those 7 well-being goals. And one of them, of course, is a healthier Wales. And I like within that one, I like a compassionate nation. You know, that's what we want towards people with disabilities. I always think if we create an environment where the most vulnerable person gets the right support from us, everybody else will be fine. And that compassionate support is about understanding mental well-being, which is really important to understand. And the other act it's the Social Service and Wellbeing Act. It provides, again, a legal framework for us to improve the well-being and care needs and support of people. It has the principles of the voice and control. So that's really important for us in learning disability, making sure that people with learning disabilities have voice and control within our service and what we care for them. Prevention and early intervention. So early intervention with parents, with children, it's really prevention of anything else, the right support at the right time. And well-being, measuring the success of care and support, making sure that what we do, it contributes to their well-being and not otherwise. And the last one, of course, from that social service and well-being is the co-production, and that is ingrained within learning disability as well, is the co-production. So those are the kind of cornerstone of the things that are there for everybody, but I find that learning disability sits really well in the aspects of those acts as well, and our policy in Wales. And they're specific to Wales, which is what we need to look at. So recently as well, we've got the Health and Social Care Act in Wales. This is kind of looks at the NHS and its purpose and its drive, and we're improving quality. So the quality and safety of our patients is really the duty of, we all have a duty of quality, which is really important to hear. That citizens' voice is really important to hear. So even though it's fairly new and the NHS exec is fairly new for all of us, it's worth looking at that and thinking about how do we see our service users, the people that use our service in the way we work within that act. Specifically to learning disability, as I said, we have had no All Wales strategies in '83, so we've had the series of guidance. And this was a national programme that came out in 2018 and to 2021. And it had 5 themes looking at early years, housing, social care, health, education, employment. It came out with 24 recommendations, and these really worked alongside the 7 well-being goals that we had. And the follow-on, therefore, to that, and what we currently work within, is the Strategic Action Plan. And this is in being until 2026. And this is, there's been one implementation and the review of it. So there is ongoing review, so that you'll be able to see that on the website where we're at now. It has specific goals to achieve, especially within health. So there are priority areas, and as I said, health, including the reduction of health inequalities and avoidable deaths in people with learning disability, is high on the agenda within this strategic action plan, and with other things, the COVID recovery, enabling independent living, education of children. So there are lots of priority areas, but there are 15 areas within the health priority that we are looking at. So this is where most of our work, and I'm no sure that Laura after me will be looking at some of those health areas within this priority. So it's a theme, it's a key theme within the priority areas, and it includes that commitment to delivering the legacy from the other Improving Lives programme as well. So there are, within that, there are 15 key areas. And so just to give you some overview of some of the work that's going on in Wales, these are some of the things that we are looking at. So every person with a learning disability has a right to a health check and a health action plan by their GP. This is currently annual, but we are also saying it should be needs on clinical basis. So everybody should have that health check and the health action plan after it. We're looking at transition from children to adult services. There's work around vaccinations and COVID, and making sure that people get screening at the right time. We have a care bundle, which is a pathway for people with learning disabilities going into acute hospitals, and that's under review currently. We've got the PRF, which is the Paul Ridd Foundation Education and Training Pack. So the foundation level is open and should be mandatory now across all health board for everybody. So everybody should doing that mandatory foundation level. And we are currently working on the Tier 2 and Tier 3, which is advanced and enhanced level for people who work more closely with people with learning disability. We're looking at the core business of community teams. What should everybody offer? We're trying to look at, not the variation of services across Wales. So it's not a postcode lottery that you get the same and a good quality service around Wales. Early intervention and crisis response, looking at specialist services, inpatients, reducing restrictive practice, looking at health equalities as an outcome framework, looking at mortality review and deaths of people with learning disabilities. We still die. the average age is 62, so they die about 20 years younger than the rest of us, the population. We are expecting a leader report to come out, which is the death review in England, will come out middle of October. And I think there's going to be some changes that come out. Things like one of the major causes of death of people with learning disabilities are respiratory care, but we are now looking at cardiac as well, cardiology, because of things like obesity, lack of knowledge around diabetes and things like that, which is really important for us. So there's lots of work going on in areas that I suppose we could work together as well in lots of these areas. And, you know, the special school nursing framework is there for the children as well when we're working. So there's kind of a lot of things at the moment going on, and workforce is a big issue for everybody as well across a lot of the areas with the liaison as well. So lots of things going on, but it all's happening under the strategic action plan. And we're really lucky that we've got an improvement Cymru Learning Disability team that are also looking quite closely at these action plans as well, that we, you know, if you've got any questions, we can make sure that we can answer some of that. But so that's the kind of background of where we're at, and we're trying to, you know, do a lot of things, I think, with at the moment a little bit of finance to go with it, and think more of what we're going to do. So I suppose wanted to think in the end was just this notion of parenting for me, you know, what is it, you know, how much do you have to be able to do of these parenting tasks to be a parent? And I'm sure if somebody came to ask me before I had my 3 boys, I think I'd fail every test going, but there you are, and halfway through, as I had 3 in 3 years, and it was really hectic and mad. But, you know, so if we need support, and we all need support, you know, at different times in our life, don't we? But if you need external support to come in and help you with those tasks that, you know, what is the balance that we are as a society think? Is it ethical, right, and sustainable? You know, where do we draw that line? And at what point do we say, actually, with all this support, yes, you can just about hold it together, or we should be providing that, or that's the right thing to do. Your children seem okay. You know, what is that, and at what expense do we make those decisions? At what point do we say, actually, that isn't sustainable? And is that what we say? And on what grounds? Is it financially? Is it ethical, morally? Is it because you have a learning disability? Is it because you just don't have the right support? So I just want you to kind of think, you know, on what kind of grounds do we make these decisions? And I think we need to think about giving the parents the support to see if they can meet the children's needs and give them the right support in the right way, tailored to that individual parent. And it's that balance between the support and protection of the child that we really have to be clear and evidenced what we do and how we do it. It's really important, I think. Because for me, you know, exercising your choice and making your decisions about your own life are so important. It gives people, that's your well-being and your sense of identity. And we as professionals need to think, if we are making those decisions around parenting, how do we do them, and on what evidence do we do them, and have we given them the right support at all times? So as I said, you know, there are parents with learning disabilities, or there are and not necessarily having children with learning disabilities. There are parents who have children with learning disabilities, and there's a mixture of families out there. But you know, if you had a 4 in 10 chance of your baby being removed from you after birth, would you take that risk of having a child? Because that's what people with learning disability face. You know, this is what we're kind of looking at, some of the research, a 4 in 10 chance that you won't be able to keep that child for whatever reason. And when we look at those reasons, they're usually not the learning disability bit. It's the other things around, the complex things around them. So with the right support at the right time, good communication between professionals, and especially between adult and children's services, you know, parents with learning disabilities can be supported, and they can bring up children successfully. There are lots of success stories. As I said, the research is really patchy. I think we've got, Booth was in 2005 and thought that children and parents with a learning disability are more likely to come into care, and that was it. But there's no direct, people are talking about between 40 and 60% of parents with learning disability having their children removed due to being assessed and able to provide adequate parenting. How do we measure adequate parenting? How to do that in a clearly assessed way? There's some other people have said that in the court protection system, children of parents with learning disability may be overrepresented, but that's usually from neglect rather than deliberate forms of abuse. So then we need to think about how do we support that, if that's one of the things that we come about. And that was more of in the 2000 and 2002. So it's been really difficult to find any concrete data around parenting and people with learning disability in Wales. And it's really difficult because it's usually a small number of people we look for. And some of the interviews we have are from solicitors and people rather than people with learning disabilities themselves. So we are looking at, mothers and families need resources, knowledge, skills and experience to look after their child, don't they? And we should be able to do that in an anti-discriminatory way with the right support at the right time. So there's good practice, of course, providing information and in plain language, clear coordinated referrals, that we can design the supports to meet the person and the individuals and the children, putting the right support at the right time. And it's a long-term investment. People have learning disability for life. It's a lifespan issue for people. They live with learning disability. So, that kind of short-termism, firefighting things is not going to work. It needs a long-term look at it. And we need to think about advocacy, and that comes out quite strongly in some of the literature, that we are looking at good advocacy. And that goes back to our well-being and strategies about voice control and helping people to be a part of their right lives. We've got guidance for social worker. It came out this year from the Welsh Government. So there's guidance for families where the parent has a learning disability, and that is based on research in Wales that was conducted in 2019. So the words within that document is that there is commitment to make sure that the child remains with the family. There's commitment, to make things better, I suppose, for people and give them a better opportunity. And there's pockets of good practice, and that's what we're looking at, is that pockets of good practice, which is what we want to replicate through improvement and ways of improvement. And for me, when you're looking or working with people with learning disability, whether they are your parents or they are the child, it's about reasonable adjustments. So we're going back to the Equality Act, and this is our cornerstone of everything we do. And I think as a learning disability nurse, what I want to do is to make myself out of a job, because people with learning disabilities shouldn't need a specialist nurse. Everybody should have their reasonable adjustments to make things better, to make it fine for them. And I always think, it's, giving people the same opportunities isn't good enough. We've got to think about the person. We've got to think about how we include people. And whatever you do and in whatever role you work, it's about reasonable adjustments, and it's about social justice and being fair. And if parents with a learning disability decide to have a child, they have as much right as anybody else, and they have their human rights as much to enjoy the life of having a young child in their life. And of course, we then have to base that with that, looking at the rights of the child and the human rights of the child for a good quality of life as well. And that's the dilemma. But I'm asking, one size doesn't fit all, and it is really a big balance between the rights of individuals, support, and the protection of children. So I'm just going to finish, but think about the reasonable adjustments. But my other thought is about how we use our language as professionals with people with learning disability, and the Positive About Down syndrome has brilliant websites, and I know it's particularly around children with Down syndrome, but the ways that how you talk to families is what they say. Nobody really says congratulations when a child is born with learning disability. It takes ages for that to happen. And I really like the way, nobody told me and what they did. So some of the things, nobody told me that the scenic route would be so beautiful. They told me I would struggle, nobody told me your eyes would sparkle like diamonds. They just said you look different. So all these kind of things, it's about how we as individuals tell people, of how we talk to people, how we embrace life with people. And I think we all have an opportunity to make a difference and to give people a chance. We're only talking about, the right to life, the right to have a chance. And I hope, that you, just after today, the agenda looks fantastic, and I'm really pleased that you're thinking about people with learning disabilities, and I just hope that they're in the forefront of your mind. And yeah, if we make it right to the most vulnerable, you'll make it right for everybody else. So thank you.
Ruth, thank you so much to think about and consider there. We do have time now for questions. If has anybody got anything that they'd like to ask Ruth, or I suppose any reflections on what Ruth has shared with us at all? Come on, we've got 10 minutes to fill. Go on, Nicola.
I just thought that was brilliant, Ruth. Thank you. Yeah, loads to think about and consider. I'm really interested in what those parenting assessments actually look like. You mentioned the word skills, or tasks or skills, but we know the parenting is a lot more than that as well, isn't it? Is how a parent thinks about their child, and that parent-infant relationship, and being able to support their development and well-being. So it just made me think about what is in that assessment. What are people actually assessing, and are they assessing necessarily the right things, or is it more focused on sort of risks and being able to carry out sort of the more day-to-day tasks with children, as opposed to thinking of kind of parents' mentalization skills and ability to think about their child's development. So I was just got my mind really thinking about that.
Yeah, well, I'm glad, because that's what I don't want to. I'm sure you know lots of the things that I don't know, and it's not about that. I just wanted to get you to think about it, because I have no right answers, because every individual you'll meet will be so different. Every person with a learning disability will be their unique self. They'll have a unique set of skills, and it is about getting to know them. And I can't, tell you, underestimate the time that it will take you to get to know somebody. And I think that's something is difficult with some assessments. We don't spend enough time just being with people and just spending that time rather than ticking some box, going through an assessment. We need to spend some time with people. And sometimes with people with learning disability, you need to talk to other people around them, how they are supported and how they do. And last week I met a young lady who, I can call her young. She was about the same age as me, but she showed me a picture of her. She had a learning disability, and she showed me a picture of her son, and she was so excited. And she said, "I found him on Facebook," she said, and I went, "Oh, I said, and he only lives up the road." And so we started talking, and she said, when her husband died, her son was 9, and on that day, her son went into care. and she had never seen him, only she sent him a card when he was 10 and 11, and then hadn't seen him for the last 20 odd years, and found him that he was now in supported living, and found his where he lived and on Facebook. And I just thought, you know, these are some people that the system has changed. I'm hopefully, please tell me the system has changed. But gosh, this young, you know, for me, somebody the same age as me, she had her young lad was the same age as mine. And I'm just thinking, gosh, how awful was that system that that thought that was the right thing to do. And she was like, well, maybe he'll come and live with me now, she said, you know. But we still have these stories and no assessment of anything. You know, you need to spend time with people, don't we? We need to really spend time. And I know time is precious and we're really busy, but when you meet people with learning disabilities, you really need to spend that time with them. So yeah, thanks, Nicola. Good to make you think.
Ooh, wow, okay. Got a question? Sorry, Anne-Marie, I didn't see your hand there.
No, it's an observation, I suppose. Whenever I hear talking about vulnerable groups, you know, I always think about it. I'm really passionate about completely individualized care. And I talk to midwives about that all the time. If we get true individualized care right, then we meet the needs of every individual, regardless of ethnicity, of learning difficulties. And you know, you made me think when you were saying you get it right for the most vulnerable, you get it right for all, because I think, you know, when you take that lens, you really are practicing with that individual approach. But I loved when you brought in social justice, human rights, and then reasonable adjustments. I think we all work in systems and services that we could probably all break down as, say, are broken in certain ways. But that word reasonable adjustment really packs a punch for me, because when I'm going into a maternity service and I've got an individual before me that requires a certain adjustment to that to make it suitable for them to access it, make their anxieties less. You know, just that terminology when I'm pitching that to a manager or a ward manager and say, look, you know, this is a reasonable adjustment that we can make to meet the needs of that person. So I think that the language and terminology mentioned that we use when we work with individuals can also be translated when we're communicating the needs that we recognise to managers or services that should really be open to flexing and making those reasonable adjustments for all of our service users, isn't it? So thank you for those, because I'm always pinching terminology if it helps. So that's great.
It's an anticipatory rule within the Equality Act. So all public services has to do reasonable adjustments. It's not. It's in the Equality Act. So it, you know, if you want to break the act, that's it. But that, you know, this is, you have a right. People have a right to reasonable adjustments to get not the same care, but the right care, you know, because we all don't need the same care to get to the same place, do we? So it is about reasonable adjustments. Yeah, brilliant.
Lovely, thank you, Sue Ann.
Hiya, Ruth.
Hello, Sudati.
We're developing Best Startup on our health board website from preconception up to teenagers, and sharing with us the positive about Down Syndrome UK. It looks fab, and hopefully I'll make sure that we can link it onto our health board website. And then Samantha now is putting lots of links in a sidebar, so maybe Samantha's answered my question. I was just wondering, was there similar things like that for Wales alone, or is there any other similar to the Down Syndrome UK website that you would signpost me on, that we could create an area within the Best Startup for?
Yeah, absolutely. No, Positive About Down Syndrome have a Wales coach, regional maternity person, and I'll find her and I'll put the link for you in the chat. But she's brilliant, and she's going to come up to North Wales, because I spoke to her. She's going to come and do some work. So I'm expecting dates for her, Siwan, and she was going to try and get some coordinated, because they work with Serendut, and the ones that give the boxes. I don't know if you've seen those. So Serendut is a Welsh charity of mums with Down syndrome, and they provide a little box to give to mums who have children with Down syndrome. And the box that says, you know, congratulations, this is a lovely thing, something really positive. So they give out, and they have been giving them to Betsy Cadwaladr. I think they've been around every health board, Seren Dut it's called, and they have little boxes and they're lovely. And she said, you know, you don't get anything positive, and it's so lovely to have something positive. And one of the things for me now as well is that babies that are born with Down syndrome are something like 90% unexpected. So that parents who may find out that they have are expecting a child with Down syndrome might not got through with the pregnancy. So what we are finding is that the parents that do give birth to children with Down syndrome, it's unexpected. So the staff don't expect it, the parents, it's unexpected. So the trauma of that and how it's dealt with because it's unexpected, it's really important. And more so now, you know, so this is one of the things that Positive Down syndrome are saying, you know, people aren't prepared for it because mostly now, you know, a lot of families decide not to go through with the pregnancy. So therefore, there's this initial thing that they're trying to change, which is why they've got these boxes as well.
Okay, yeah.
Lovely. So Anne, most people probably don't know about your website. Do you want to pop the link in? Because it is absolutely fantastic. BCU have developed a website that is sort of full of great information for people to take a look at. Maybe think about replicating in their health board areas. Okay, I think we've got one more question. I think Gemma's got her hand up, and then we'll move on if that's. Oh, we've got two quick questions.
Yeah,
I
was only going to say, my nephew's 8, and yeah, you know, go back 8 years ago, they were still taking mum aside to see if she wanted to terminate. And the conversation was very much, you need to think about the impact on your older daughter. So I know, and that was only 8 years ago. And I'm currently working with a gorgeous little boy at the moment. And yeah, and they didn't know. So yeah, it's still very much, so it's been really relevant, everything you've said, and yeah, it's I thank you. But yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say that, share that, because it's still happening.
No, thank you for sharing. Yeah, thank you for sharing. And it is, but you know, the more we talk about it openly, I think the more that people realise you choose your words carefully, but you know, when a child is born, it's a celebration, and I think people forget that sometimes. I know things can be difficult, and it will be difficult, but you know, it's a celebration, isn't it, for that family?
It is. As my sister-in-law says, she was taken into the room of gloom. You know, you know that. So that I know that took many years to, but you know, he's doing fantastic. So, and it's made her more determined. So yeah, it had a positive, but it could be very, very different. You know, and people like myself then would be, you know, trying to work and change that.
Gemma, so thank you. Thank you, Gemma. Maggie?
Sorry,
you're on mute.
I'm on mute. I've not done this for a while. It's the standard sort of awkward thing, isn't it? But Ruth, that was a fantastic presentation. I loved that final slide you gave about you know, the inclusivity is being able to look through that fence, and I think that was just really spoke to me. But I was wondering, is it mainly adults having children who've got adults who have Down syndrome having children that we're looking at, or are we looking at other learning difficulties?
It's a range, you know. So parents who have a learning disability don't necessarily give birth to children with a learning disability.
Right.
And parents with Down syndrome don't necessarily give birth to a child with Down syndrome. There is no kind of leeway to it or understanding, you know, in the mix of things. Some things are genetic, you know, some things are past genetic, but really, you know, I suppose maybe what you find, you know, some of the stuff it's growing, which is the alcohol fetal syndrome, some of that that you'll come across maybe as mental health as parents and the babies are born, but that takes some time to diagnose. There's a lot of diagnosis issues around children with learning disability. You know, it depends how you measure it. We're going back to labeling now. You know, if you're looking at milestones, it's that medicalizing and deficit, isn't it, rather than celebrating the milestones? People are kind of assessed and say, well, you haven't reached that, kind of thing.
Completely,
So it's about, you know, celebrating where we're at and how we're at, rather than measuring what's going wrong. But also, of course, we need to be learning how to support those parents properly. So yeah, there's no real, and I think because the numbers are so small as well, the research that I was able to access is based on families, only a couple of families, based on a couple of solicitors going through court, you know, with families. So it's really an under-researched area if anybody'd like to do a PhD.
No, I mean, it takes a village to raise any child, doesn't it, really? Yeah. I think that is so important. And so to be supporting parents who have, you know, what is labelled a learning disability is, you know, we would need to support any parent with a child. But anyway, I really thank you, Ruth. That was so great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Ruth. Martha,
welcome.
Note the research question there that we could potentially put through. Yeah, we're looking for research questions. So yeah.
I'll give you loads.
All right, send them across. Yeah, great. Lovely. Okay, thank you very much. So we're on to Laura Andrews, and Laura's our Senior Improvement Manager for Improvement Cymru. And Laura's going to be talking about what is and what isn't a learning disability and cognitive impairment. So over to you, Laura.
Can you see my screen? That's the first question.
Yeah, and can indeed.
Jolly good. I've succeeded with my first thing. So hi, I'm Laura Andrews and I'm Senior Improvement Manager with focus on the physical health work stream within Improvement Cymru. I wanted to start my presentation with a clip off Facebook, but my IT skills are way below my ambition. And it was pictures of a gentleman with Down syndrome stood with his son, who is now a dentist. And I just thought that was a really good positive aspect of parenting an LD. So, but unfortunately, my IT skills aren't what they used to be. So anyway. So what I am going to start with, if my screen will pass on, hang on, I'm having trouble. There we are. I'm going to give you Molly's story. So Molly was 19 when she found out she was pregnant. She lived at home with her parents and they weren't happy about the pregnancy. Her boyfriend left her when he found out that she was pregnant. She didn't have a job. She was reliant on benefits, but she was determined to keep her baby. No different to many young women across the UK. It happens fairly regularly, I would say. So what happened? Outcome 1, Molly had the baby. Her parents kicked her out, but she found a flat with the help of the local council housing officer. Services considered Molly young and inexperienced, but provided additional support via Flying Start, etc. And now, as a result, Molly has learnt the skills she needed and she and her daughter are thriving together. In outcome 2, Molly had the baby, but her parents kicked her out and her social worker placed her in a temporary mother and baby placement. Services considered Molly unable to look after her baby, but didn't provide support to teach her the skills she needed. Molly's daughter was removed from her care and adopted outside the family. Molly has once a year contact from the adoptive parents and has all these contacts in a memory box, which have affected her long-term mental health. Oh, it's not doing it again. Hang on, sorry. There we go. So why were the outcomes different? In outcome 2, Molly had a learning disability. And Molly is a real lady that I have worked with. She was going to come today, but the thought of presenting to all of you was a bit scary for her. So she's asked me to do it on her behalf. This happened to Molly 10 years ago. She's a real person who, as a result, struggles with her feelings of loss and her frustration at the way professionals judged her without assessment. She describes the mother and baby unit as being watched 24 hours a day, but no one told me if I was doing okay. No new mother knows what they're doing in the early days, but no one showed me how. So I let the baby be in case I hurt her, and they judged me for that too. So, what is a learning disability? What is it that we're talking about today? The answer is that it's different for every person who has one, but there are some things that are true for everyone with a learning disability. There are also some common and not so common conditions that will mean a person has a learning disability. And we've already mentioned this morning Down syndrome, which is probably the one that most people think of when we talk about learning disability. The Department of Health define learning disability as a significantly reduced ability to understand new or complex information and to learn new skills, so impaired intelligence, plus a reduced ability to cope independently, so impaired social functioning, and started before the age of 18 with a lasting effect on development. So that's what we're talking about. So there are differences between learning disability and learning difficulty. So a learning disability, as I've just said, is lifelong before the age of 18. It takes people longer to learn, and they may need additional support to learn those skills. They might need additional support to understand complex information, and they may be reliant on non-verbal communication because of their understanding of social cues, etc. With learning difficulty, it's generally a single diagnosis of ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, or autistic spectrum disorder. And I deliberately put autism there because people with autism don't necessarily have a learning disability. Many have normal intelligence. People with learning difficulty tend to have attended mainstream education without any support, and it's the without support bit that's important there. So people with a learning disability, many of them attend mainstream education as well, but generally they will have additional support from a learning support assistant or a specialist unit within the school. With a learning difficulty, many people have gained qualifications. They might not have many, they might have several, but within learning disabilities, the likelihood of somebody having achieved GCSEs is quite low. And within learning difficulty, many people are able to drive a car and will have a recorded IQ above 70. Now, I'm mentioning IQ today, but we are trying to move away from IQ. But unfortunately, many services still use that statistic of below 70 to prevent access to services or to allow access to services. But the key message, and you're going to hear this a lot today, I think, is reasonable adjustments are everybody's responsibility. So whether somebody has a learning disability or a learning difficulty, or you're not sure which they have, they are still in need of reasonable adjustments. And it's our responsibility to make sure that we adapt our services to meet those individuals' needs. So what does research tell us? So as Ruth was just telling us, it's really hard to find out statistics when it comes to parents with a learning disability. But we do know that a number of different types of assessment are used to establish the presence of learning disability, including IQ testing, alongside a range of functional assessments. Most parents with learning disabilities fall into the borderline category with an IQ of just above 70, meaning they can't access a range of services due to strict eligibility criteria. And in addition, many people don't want the label of learning disability, which is why it's so important for us as professionals to provide the support that people need and make those adaptations that we need if we are refused access to a service. So Molly had a learning disability. How could we have done things differently for Molly? There are 5 key points of good practice when we're supporting parents with a learning disability. Communication, services working together, support based on what you can do and what you need, long-term support when it's needed, and access to independent advocacy. In fact, if you took out in support with the learning disability out of that title, that's what we need to do to support any parent of a child. Okay, but when we come to communication, adapt your pace to suit individual needs, give bite-sized chunks, think about how you're saying things to people, and if check understanding, because sometimes we have this acquiescence that people with learning disabilities will have, which is where they will say yes to everything. But actually, if you reword the question or the information, it will have a completely different response from the individual. So always check that somebody has understood. Use repetition to reinforce. So don't be afraid to repeat things 2 or 3 times, because that allows the person the time to process that information and to interpret it in the way that they can. Modeling behaviour. So instead of sitting behind a desk or at the side of a desk talking to somebody, actually show them what to do. Very often people with a learning disability have that they're practical learners, they're not verbal learners. So if you can actually show somebody this is what you do in a real life situation, because sometimes there can be a difficulty in changing it. So, for example, if you showed putting a nappy on a doll, it may not commute to putting a nappy on a baby. So you're better using the real life examples of when you're trying to teach a skill. And providing accessible information in a range of formats, not just written format, because many people with a learning disability aren't able to read or write. So it's about having videos and online resources as well as verbal delivery of material. And actually, sometimes that allows you to use the repetition to reinforce, because if you give somebody a video, they can watch it over and over again until they get it. They can show it to any support that they have at home, who can then reinforce what it is that you're saying. And as I said, always check for understanding. Services working together. I think we've all dreamed of this in the NHS, haven't we? Working for however long you've been in the service, we all dream of services working together, but it is so crucial when you're working with somebody with a learning disability. We know that many parents with learning disability aren't just having a child, they're facing issues with housing, poverty, because they're more likely to be living on benefits. And it's essential that services provided to support communicate with each other as well, because I've in Molly's case, for example, she'd be told one thing by her social worker, she'd be told one thing by her midwife, one thing by the health visitor, and they all contradicted each other. And that leaves the individual confused. So it's about our services giving a clear and consistent message to that individual about what it is that's expected of them, what it is that they have to do. And we can help that process as professionals by sharing our communication with individuals. And it may be just a quick email to the social worker saying, I met with Molly today and this is what we agreed and this is what we've asked her to look at. Yeah, because then other professionals working are on point and can reinforce what it is that we're trying to get through to the individual. And again, remember, reasonable adjustments must be provided and are legally required under the Equality Act. So services that provide support based on what you can do. What help does the individual actually need? There's a lot of assumptions when dealing with people with a learning disability, and very often it's a negative assumption. So, well, they've got a learning disability, they can't do this, they can't do that. And actually, the biggest frustration I've heard from ladies with a learning disability is that it's always presumed that they can't do it, that they won't keep a tidy house, that they won't know when to feed the baby, that they won't know what to do. And actually, they knew all of that. What they needed to know was how to measure the water in the bottle, or Was the breastfeeding going well? So it's please base it on what the individual actually needs, and look at tasks. So, for example, I used a feeding bottle there. If somebody's having trouble making up the milk properly, then think about other ways that you can pitch that information. Think of other ways that you can do. So, is there a mug in the house that measures the exact amount of water that you need for the bottle at that stage? And then get them to use that, because that saves the literacy skills of being able to read a line on a bottle, or put a sticker on the outside of the bottle so they know where to fill the water up to. Practical things that can help people achieve the task at the end. And show the individual how to do something, then allow them to try and allow them to fail sometimes. Yeah. Molly, one of the things she said about the mother and baby placement she was in was that the lady that ran the unit was watching her constantly, but never actually said that was right, or if you do it this way, that would be better. So it's about showing somebody and then observing them while they do it, and being delicate about that relationship with them. Not the no, 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 but the yes, that's right, you've done that. Now, what do we do next? And allowing people to think and to process the information that it is that you're trying to teach them. And again, providing accessible information in a range of formats, including video and online resources, as well as verbal delivery of material. I remember when I was pregnant, and it was that long ago, yes, that we still had everything in paper format. And I had a book about your pregnancy. That was my Bible. And I'm normal intelligence. That was my Bible. I read through it. Where are we now? Is this normal? Should I be doing this? Whatever. So never underestimate the power of something for somebody to look at when you're not around and when you're not on the end of a phone. Longer term support when needed. So as services, we're very good at having cut-off dates, aren't we? So the midwife will support for the first week, and then we hand over to the health visitor up until the 5, and then that gradually phases out. But people with a learning disability, we know, have additional needs, and we know take longer to learn skills. So we need to consider the need for ongoing support over those cut-off times. So if the midwife is the best person to provide that support to that individual for maybe a week longer, for 2 weeks longer, why can't we do it? It's about the reasonable adjustments for those individuals. And remember, a learning disability doesn't mean you can't learn, it just takes longer to learn. And we need to show different ways to be able to learn. And often long-term relationships with the support are the key to a healthy child and a happy family, and a child remaining in the home. Access to independent advocacy. Advocacy is essential, particularly if the courts are involved. And very often with ladies with a learning disability, the courts are involved. There's a higher proportion of people with a learning disability taken to court. The advocacy have the luxury of being able to provide emotional support and that long-term care that we're talking about. So very often, good advocacy services have known the individual before the baby has been born, and will continue to support them well into the baby developing into a child and then an adult. In Molly's case, her local self-advocacy group have been the difference between her being admitted to psychiatric care and being supported in the community, because they've provided that emotional support that she needed through the days after her baby was removed. And like I say, they often become the long-term support for families, and they offer them the opportunity to meet other parents in the same position. So very often our local self-advocacy groups will have parenting groups, and will have parents with a learning disability groups. So it's always worth you as a professional, if you're struggling, to contact your local self-advocacy groups and see if there's any support that they can provide to the individual. And chances are they might already know them. So Molly's important message, and this is what I'm going to end on. Please don't judge or patronise us. Please do tell us what we've done well as help us when we struggle. And most importantly, believe we can do it. Parenting is hard for everyone. Okay, any questions?
Thank you there, Laura. I think there's a really important message there, just to remind us everybody's unique, irrespective of their needs. Yeah, no, that's great. So any thoughts, any questions, anyone?
I got off light there.
No, you haven't. I say there's a little bit of a pause, and then we'll have, is it Jane?
I just wanted to say that I think it's brave of Molly to share her story with us, whether she's here or not. I think it's brave that she's actually taken that step to share her story, because we do have a lot of instances in our services, and you know, it needs to be highlighted. So I'm really glad she shared her story.
Thank you. I'll pass that on to her.
Thank you, Jane. Any other thoughts? We've got a few midwives, health visitors here. We all bring our own stories and experiences, don't we? Our own frustrations, how things, yeah, maybe similar to Molly's story that we've experienced. Wanting that to change. Anne-Marie?
Yeah, it just made me think of a family I looked after when I was a community midwife, you know, and the pregnant mum had learning difficulties, and her partner had learning difficulties and was diagnosed ADHD. And they lived with her parents, and her parents had learning difficulties, and they all lived together in this little unit. And they had lots of animals, lots of pets. You know, it was a really chaotic home, but it was their home. And I think as a midwife, and I pick up on that reasonable adjustments again, because as a midwife, I became their advocate, and was able to sort of put plans in place, because when they went into a hospital environment, his behaviour changed, and then staff become really concerned, and then it fell into that safeguarding arena. And when you actually took the time to sort of advocate really and tell and explain why we see some of these behaviours, why some of the things that when they're in the hospital environment became so difficult, and pulling in third sector, pulling in all the support that's available. You know, we did some really amazing work and linked in with housing, and we supplied them with a larger house so we could keep them all together, because that was their support network. They had some support in housing the animals, and you know, and doing that in a way that they were comfortable with. And as a family unit, you know, they took that baby home and were wrapped around with support. And I think sometimes, you know, with midwifery, we go in and, like you said, we discharge after a week, but actually the possibilities are so much more. So linking in with a health visitor and really being able to work together, you know, it's not just about delivering the baby, it's creating that family unit, isn't it, with the individual needs. So yeah, it brought back that family with me, and I learned so much from working with that family and seeing them stay together, when on paper the chances of that baby being removed was so, you know, real at the very beginning when I first met them. And you have that anxiety as a professional, don't you? You think, oh my goodness, you know, am I making the right call? Am I pulling in the right people? But they deserved better, and I feel like we gave them better. So, you know, that the unique ways that you can work with people can really make massive differences for the children and that family unit, isn't it? So thank you for bringing that memory back to me, because sometimes I forget these wonderful families that I've met, you know, working in a different post now. But I've enjoyed thinking about them, and I still hope that they're all doing well. So thank you.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. And we've got Cara.
Sorry, I was just going to say, it just makes me feel really lucky that in Cardiff we've got like our ELAM team, which is our vulnerable mums team. So it just provides these more vulnerable families with just tailored, individualized care, where we're keeping those families together by going in and intervening so early and working with all the different services. Loads of people are bringing those babies home because of the work that the midwives are doing, and working really closely with children's services, the health visiting services, mental health services. And it's a shame that that's not what all of the care we deliver across the board is like, because it definitely, like, I feel really lucky and privileged to have worked in that team. But it shouldn't be that different to what I worked as a generic midwife. It shouldn't be, but it's the time constraints, the pressures, staffing, financial implications that stop all professionals across all the boards delivering care that they want to deliver. And I always bang the drum for Elan, because I feel like it should just be, that should be how all of our care is delivered across it completely. And I shouldn't be sitting here saying, oh, I feel so privileged to work in that team. I should feel privileged to go to work and do my job every day. But it's so hard that realistically only a small percentage of women, I can only speak for Cardiff and the Vale, get that personalised care and get that extra support, enabling them to obviously, you know, keep that family unit together and provide them with sort of long-term skills that they're not having. So on one side it's really good, and on the flip side it's rubbish. That's not across the board in sort of all services. But it would be so nice if, yeah, well, it's staffing, isn't it, and financial implications. But if that could be the ethos of how all care is delivered, isn't it? Sort of really across the board, a fair delivery of care to everybody, no matter what your sort of demographic is, your social input, your mental health sort of history, your sort of disability. It should just be that that's how we're able to deliver care to everyone, so everyone gets the fair chance, isn't it? So actually it started really positive, saying I'm really happy I work there. Now I feel really sad that that's not what we do for everyone.
But it gives us something to focus on, doesn't it? And everyone here is here because they're striving for the best for everybody, irrespective of all of the difficulties. We've got to keep that in mind, don't we? And that's I suppose it's holding the hope. Any other question? Got time for another question if there's one? Otherwise, we'll move on. Any other thoughts? No. Okay, thank you very much, Laura. Okay, so next we're going to go to Kerry-Ann Llywelyn, and Kerry-Ann's a risk and governance midwife in Hywel Dda, and has developed a maternity passport for women with additional care needs. So over to you, Kerry-Ann.
Oh, thank you, Sharon, and thank you everybody for this opportunity to be able to share our maternity passport here. So the story I'm going to share is a very personal story to this lady, and it's a very sad story. It's absolutely shared with her consent, and in fact the mum is very keen that we share Paige, her daughter's story, and share her legacy and sort of how we came from where we were to where we are now. So I'm by no means any sort of expert in learning disabilities, so we absolutely relied so heavily on our colleagues in the Learning Disability Service to be able to develop this passport. So huge thank you to them for all of their support in getting us here. It's just a short presentation and then some questions which hopefully I'll be able to answer at the end. So this is Paige's story and the development of the maternity passport. So P, the mum, was booked into maternity services in her third pregnancy and was noted to have had 2 previous babies. Both babies were smaller than expected, and therefore there was lots more monitoring of this mum in pregnancy to assess the growth of this baby. The baby was noted to be smaller than expected during pregnancy, but was growing along the same line. In May 2021, at 34 weeks and 5 days, she attended her planned growth scan, and again, the baby was smaller than expected, but remained on the same line. So the blood flow to the baby indicated that perhaps the placenta wasn't working as well as it was previously. So a repeat scan was done in 2 days' time, and at each appointment, P was asked if she was happy with the movements, and she always nodded in agreement. So she returned as planned at 35 weeks for a repeat scan, and sadly the scan revealed that baby Paige had died. She was admitted to the ward and had a caesarean birth, which was in keeping with her wishes, and baby Paige was still born later that day. The mum was supported to spend time with baby Paige using the cuddle cot, and this helped to create everlasting memories. So looking at reflection, and I think it is really important to be honest and transparent, and there are certainly things that we could and should have done better, particularly in view of this mum's history. So looking at our reflection from learning of this case, So the family were initially invited to a meeting to discuss the review findings. However, due to a breakdown in communication, the meeting did not conclude fully. In fact, there was quite an escalation of the conversations during that meeting, and it led to a total breakdown in trust between the family and the health board. So a formal complaint was issued and further investigations ensued. And over a year later, the family were invited to a further meeting with a PALS advisor who was also present for support. The review findings were shared and the family's questions were answered. Although it was an incredibly sad and difficult meeting for all involved, it was also an invaluable opportunity for us to learn as a health service to look at where we were falling short, particularly for women with learning disabilities. So reflections from the meeting. P is autistic. However, this was not explored or considered during any of her previous pregnancies or following birth, and there was a missed opportunity to implement reasonable adjustments which would have enhanced the quality of the care that she received. So although there was an awareness that P was autistic, there wasn't any specialist care plan in place for her, no adjustments were made for her whatsoever. And as a service, we talked about the difference that if that had been a physical disability and the adjustments that we would have made to ensure inclusivity, and that was sadly lacking in this case. So P recalled the questions at each appointment. Are you happy with the baby's movements? She shared that due to being autistic, she had not understood the nuances of the question, but felt compelled to nod in agreement and would go home that day and would ask her mum what was actually meant by that question. She shared that by asking a direct question would have aided her understanding and supported her to feel included in her care, that she felt somewhat passive in her care and that she would just nod in agreement. The review team concluded this would have been unlikely to alter the outcome and would have been unlikely to save Paige, but it was a vital point for learning, both from the care that she received during the pregnancy, but also from a review of adverse events, so that we could better support those families. So this is our All Wales maternity record, which is a handheld set of notes that are given to all women during pregnancy. So the record doesn't actually specifically ask whether they have a learning disability. It asks whether they have any issues with communication or whether they have any issues reading and writing, but it doesn't specifically say, do you have a learning disability or do you consider yourself to have any additional needs? So that's something that was one of our first steps in the development of this passport, is making sure that we were actually asking this question to all women. So we implemented an individualised sticker in each maternity handheld record to ensure that this question is asked inclusively of all women and birthing people. So after the feedback from this meeting, a small team of us got together to look at where we were falling short, and it was a very honest and very frank discussion. So the woman contributed to the development of the passport at each stage in memory of her baby Paige, and it was really important to us that there was a legacy for her baby and that she felt included to be able to drive change and make a difference to the future of the service. So the learning disability team were integral to the development of the tool, along with the maternity experience midwife, who worked with other women with learning disabilities to make sure that their experience was also reflected within that. So this is just a brief timeline of how we got to that. So the disability passport needs were identified from the case study. The maternity experience midwife then started researching similar passports in other health boards. However, we were unable to find anything that related specifically to maternity. There were some generic passports available and there were some paediatric passports, but there was nothing specifically for pregnant women. So there was a paediatric passport already in use in Hywel Dda and a generic disability passport widely used in the NHS. But as I said, they weren't specific to our maternity service. So the maternity experience midwife started to design a passport with the amalgamation of the different passports that were available, but conscious it needed to be only one A4 page long, so it was both easy to read and could be quickly and read by healthcare practitioners who were actually caring for the woman. So we didn't need or want anything that was overly lengthy, because we felt that it would be missed and then the quality of the care might be impacted. So this led to the initial stage of the maternity passport, but maternity experience midwife realised that more input was needed to ensure that the language was inclusive and correct. We are certainly not experts in this field, so it was so important that this was co-produced with experts. So the maternity experience midwife contacted the Learning Disability Department for assistance in having the passport peer reviewed, and to also ensure that the language within the passport was easy to read, the layout and the design would be easy to review, and see if they had any groups that could review the document before it was made public. So fast forward to February then, looking at some very senior people within those teams, they assisted in adjusting the questions to be used to identify those with learning needs, and took it to the service user-led easy read group for comment. Again, really mindful that the service users' feedback was so important to the development of this passport. So once we'd finally had the passport approved and signed off, we then took it internally to our guideline meeting to make sure that it was ratified through the formal processes, but also acknowledge that we needed to do some additional learning around this as midwives to make sure that everybody was familiar and comfortable with the use of this document, because it was something very, very new for all of us, and making sure that the staff felt comfortable to ask everybody that same question. And I think sometimes there is a bit of a taboo associated with it, and it can be seen quite negatively. So it was about saying that this is a standardized question for everybody. And it's a really positive thing to actually be able to acknowledge that, so that we can set the wheels in motion to make those reasonable adjustments, and that they would vary depending on the individual woman's needs. And we could only get that through that collaboration with the woman. But if we could do that very, very early in pregnancy, so they book into maternity services around 8 weeks, term is obviously 40 weeks. So that's a long time for us to be able to work with families, looking at continuity of care, looking at building up that rapport and that relationship, so that we can actually provide a meaningful service to those women. So once we'd completed the passport, it then was then translated into Welsh. The sticker was designed to add to the front of the maternity notes. So it was just a small little purple sticker, so that everybody was aware that there was a maternity passport in place for this woman. So the questions identify those who needed to be filling in the passport were added to page 1 of the All Wales maternity record. So the questions could be asked at the start of the appointment. And in May, the first passport was actually rolled out in use publicly. So this is what the passport looks like. As I said, it's a very simple document. It's just one A4 page, and it's filled in usually by the community midwife at the time of booking. But we have had some cases where it's actually been sort of identified further on during the pregnancy, and we say, you know, it's absolutely fine for it to be completed as soon as people become aware that some adjustments may need to be made. So the little purple square in the corner is the sticker that goes on the outside of the handheld notes, just to alert all care providers to the fact that there's a maternity passport in place. So the dandelion was put on there at the request of Paige's mum, and that was something that was really very, very important to her. So like I said, the document is really relatively simple, and it's co-produced with women, and it's about making those adjustments that are important to them. It was also translated into Welsh, and it is going through a process of evaluation at the moment, but because it's been fairly newly implemented and lots of those women are still pregnant, so they haven't actually had their babies yet, it's a bit too soon for us to be able to evaluate the impact that the tool has had. But from sort of more anecdotally speaking to the families that have got a passport in place, they have found it really very, very beneficial. And it's allowed us to open out those conversations with midwives, with obstetricians, with anaesthetists, to be able to broaden out those conversations to ensure that care is inclusive of all. So we did share the passport actually on social media, and it got picked up by the All Wales Maternity and Neonatal Record. And we also were able to feedback that we felt that there was a missed opportunity to ask women about whether they consider themselves to have any additional learning needs, and that this is a question that should be inclusively asked of everybody. So the All Wales document is currently under review, and it's actually going to be updated to include that question, so that in the future all women across Wales will be asked this question. And that this About Me page now will sit in the front of all of the handheld notes. So when we talk about sort of scale and spread, I think this has been a really, really pleasing thing to see, actually, that this relatively small development that we made as a small health board in rural West Wales has actually been able to impact and influence care across Wales, which is positive. So like I said, just short presentation, but happy to take any questions?
Thank you so much, Carrie-Anne. There, Anne-Marie, you go ahead.
You knew I'd be the first one to ask questions. Carrie-Anne, what I want to say first is absolutely congratulations, because I know firsthand how difficult it is to push through all of those systems to get something as simple as a sticker or, an extra question embedded in the notes. And the fact that you managed to magnify that and get it in the All Wales handheld records is absolutely humongous. So, like, well done for that. And when I saw the review of the handheld records, I was over the moon, especially with the way it was all laid out. So thank you for that. I'm wondering, I suppose, that we identify these cases, don't we? And the way you set out your case then is very typical how we look at cases, isn't it, with poor outcomes? And I think we all try and figure out ways to sort of reduce the negative outcome. But for me, continuity, we keep saying the same things over and over again, and continuity is the puzzle piece that packs the punch. Because when we get continuity right on the ground floor, so like you said, with that relationship base with a named midwife, and that named midwife has got all the opportunity to work flexibly, she's funded and placed in a position that she can wrap everything around that individual woman. When we get that bit right, everything else falls into line and we get everything else right. So, when we develop these kind of initiatives, I think I just don't want to take the limelight off. We've got to get that right. We've got to get the training that midwives access right, because the holistic training in learning difficulties and mental health, it's not embedded because the training program for midwives is so broad, isn't it? So I guess I just wanted to say, yeah, continuity, relationship-based care, mandatory training, Sharon, and funding that allow midwives to be where they deserve to be, which is in front of that woman, wrapping it around that individual woman, isn't it? But do you know what? Incredible piece of work, Carrie-Anne. So thank you for presenting that. And the future is brighter simply because you highlighted that need for looking at a case. So thanks for that.
Carol, sorry, I'm mindful you've got your hand up. Just a couple of things there on the mandatory training. For those that have the pleasure of being able to access ESR, you do have the Paul Ridd Foundation training that is mandated now across all health boards. So you should have been able to access that and have completed that.
I didn't know that was mandated, Sharon.
Yeah,
Paul Ridd mandated on ESR.
Yeah, absolutely. Ruth did mention it, but it's there for people to get some that there. Ruth, yes, it's there, isn't it, on ESR?
Yes, and it's also available on Learning at Wales for everybody else in social care and everything else as well, if you have an account on Learning at Wales.
Okay, I'm going to set Martha a little task. Are we able to just find the link for that, Martha, and pop it in the chat?
Sorry, Martha.
Do you know that my other thoughts were, Carrie-Anne, there is that if we're talking about additional needs, where do we stop? It's great to have that sticker. We're talking about learning difficulties and learning disability. What about additional mental health needs? Is that something that I know, you've done amazing work, but for the future, just something to think about. My other thoughts were, how is that then, I suppose, the care transferred, and all that knowledge and all that knowing handed over to the midwife? No, it's a rhetorical question. It's just something for us to think about, isn't it? If we're talking about, I know you're talking about, Anne-Marie, about continuity, but then it's about continuity and seamless service delivery, isn't it? And you all have some amazing information there that potentially could be shared, couldn't it, with others? Maybe not. Carol?
That actually leads into the question I was going to ask whether this is something that you hand over in your midwifery to health visiting handover, because quite often we're coming across parents that maybe have slipped through the net, ADHD, ASD, not actually diagnosed, and obviously the way that we're having to work with those families is different. So if a lot of that groundwork is done prior to their handover to our services, that would be really beneficial for it to be passed over.
Yeah, my hope, Carol, would be that the passport would be scanned over so that you've got that seamless transition of care from midwifery into health visiting services. But I think it's definitely an area that we could look at, certainly to improve. Because like you say, if that foundation's there and we know what the family responds well to, where the family may need some additional support. I think to be able to share that would be hugely beneficial. So it's certainly something I'll take back to our community midwife team leads to be able to cascade that. But I do think it would be really helpful. I think there's, this is just the start. I think we, absolutely committed to, and we've really acknowledged that this is a cohort of people that haven't had the limelight on them, that haven't had the attention. There's so much written about women with physical care needs, diabetic women with blood disorders and all sorts of weird and wonderful physical conditions. But yet, learning difficulties, learning disabilities are probably more prevalent than any of those physical needs, but there's so little resource actually ploughed into that cohort, I think. So that's, it came from a very, very sad place, and it certainly wasn't, generally when we're doing case reviews, we're looking at failings in care, things that we could and should have done differently. And I think to actually listen to this woman's story was so powerful, and be able to reflect that back in, and how she felt so passive in her own care, yet she should have been empowered to lead her own care. It was for me a really eye-opening moment.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you are talking about neurodiversity here, and it's something that's been coming up quite often in conversations within the network, and we're starting to look at how we develop pathways, particularly at the moment between specialist perinatal mental health teams and the support we need to be offering for women and their families where there's ADHD and ASD. So that's very much on our agenda. Any thoughts or any other questions or points of reflection at all? Martha.
Thanks, Kerry-Ann. That's really helpful. I just wondered, is that in the notes now or coming through the notes across Wales? Has it come out already, or is it
So the one I shared you, that's the shared with you, sorry, that's the is out for its final ratifications, for a final round of ratifications. I think the plan is to get it out by the end of the year. But it's the final it's out for final comment now.
No, that's great. And then I wonder, like what Carol mentioned and in the chat, there's that overlap with health visiting, whether there's a conversation to be shared with the heads of health visiting so they can kind of think about maybe that can be adapted in Healthy Child Wales records, or for example. So that's, that'll be an ongoing conversation, but that's great. Thanks, Kerry-Ann.
Thank you.
Anything else from anybody? Otherwise I can see Anka's there, so we could move on. Shall we move on? Yeah. Can I introduce Anka? I hope I'm saying your surname correctly, Mania, who's a community learning disabilities nurse for Norfolk Community Health and Care NHS Trust and a research fellow. And you're going to talk to us today about the Norfolk Antenatal Pathway for Learning Disabilities. So welcome to Wales.
Hello everyone. Thank you for having me here today. I'm delighted to be here and present to you our pathway. So allow me to start sharing. Here we are. Can anyone confirm if you can see the pathway? What I'm sharing? Yes, lovely. Thank you so much. As Sharon said, I'm a learning disability nurse and a research fellow for Niche, and I'm leading on the antenatal pathway for individuals with learning disabilities in Norfolk. Now, you might wonder why individuals with learning disabilities and not mothers with learning disabilities. In Norfolk, we are trying to pioneer and be inclusive. So the pathway, it's for both mothers and birthing people with learning disabilities to include the transgender population. So where we are based, if you don't know about Norfolk, we're based there, southeast of England, and we have 5 learning disabilities team covering the whole Norfolk. what do we do, or what do I do as a learning disability nurse? Presumably pretty much we have the same kind of job description like our Wales colleagues. So we do everything from care coordination under the CPA framework to health promotion, educating both the clients we're supporting or staff or family members. We promote sexual health. We provide PBS, behavior support. We advocate and we support people with learning disabilities to ensure that they have a good quality of life, or a quality of life they desire to have. So in terms of learning disability and pregnancy, as most of the former presentations and former presenters described, birth parents with learning disabilities, they are more likely to have access, good access to quality antenatal care that meets their care needs. And sometimes that might be extra support for the appointments, or the opportunity to have information repeated, or the information presented to them in an empowering way, whether that would be easy read or video, kind of information, or anything that the person may find empowering, because not two people are the same and the needs may be different from one another. If the person wishes to, we can involve the carers or advocates. And obviously, we really are keen for professionals to understand the complexities around consent issues. And when required, professionals in the learning disability team should liaise with other agencies involved to ensure good, appropriate care. So as my colleagues Ruth and Laura already talked about, the key features of good practice as established by the Working Together with Parents Network, that's Parents with Learning Disabilities Network. And as I already mentioned, it's about providing the right information, to making sure that the information is accessible, clear and coordinated referral and assessment processes, and that will become apparent later during my presentation why this is key. And support designated around the parents and children based on their strengths. So I don't want to see a blanket assessment where everyone is assessed in the same way, but our assessments should be empowering the parent and be based on the strengths they have, not on what they lack. Long-term support where necessary. Of course, we might work with prospective parents with learning disabilities that they might just need little support around understanding information, but also we might be supporting prospective parents that may need more than that. And also, where necessary, we would always promote access to independent advocacy. So communication, as you already kind of gathered from the previous presentations, is one of the main issues. So what a professional should do when supporting a person with learning disabilities, they should try to avoid long words, medical terms, check understanding of the person by requesting feedback, repeat the information when required, obviously offer longer appointments and use accessible information. So you probably seen already this picture. It's an old picture. So just to kind of show you the role of the learning disability nurse. So you have equality and you have equity. So as a learning disability nurses, we're trying to put reasonable adjustments in place just to kind of to achieve the outcome in the picture on your right. Obviously, the best outcome would be that fence wouldn't be there, but we know that's work in progress. So we have to kind of tap into the skills of and the expertise of learning disability nurses to achieve these outcomes. So now we're finally getting to the reason I'm here to talk about the Norfolk antenatal pathway. So the Norfolk antenatal pathway, the parenting pathway, was already the group was already established when I joined it. So the reason the group was formed was because we used to receive referrals for prospective mothers with learning disabilities quite late in the pregnancy. And I think, top of my head, the latest one was when a learning disability nurse was called and asked to come quickly into the delivery suite because they needed the learning disability nurse to complete a capacity assessment. Of course, we said this is highly inappropriate. So hence the working group was established. So when I've joined the group, there were a few different disciplines working for the same trust, is Norfolk Community Health and Care. And that was it. And they were trying to put together this county-wide pathway. And I did ask, so how would this work? You're trying to achieve something and to literally force the pathway onto the other stakeholders, onto the other NHS trusts, which is quite unfair. So what changed? So we discussed with different relevant partners, so social services, midwives, and midwife representative of across the county. So we literally invited to the table 3 different trusts and their midwives, and we agreed to develop a county-wide pathway. And because antenatal pathway and postnatal pathway, while they can overlap for a month, we decided to split it, so to have 2 pathways, one to be antenatal pathway and the second one postnatal pathway. Antenatal pathway, we just finished it and we start working on the postnatal pathway. So as I already said, it was for prospective mothers with learning disabilities. We changed that, and the terminology will be gender neutral. And the outcome and the aim of it all was for the population with learning disabilities to receive appropriate antenatal care. And when I'm saying this includes also the partners or even families that they may care for the prospective parent with learning disabilities. So the pathway is not just for the pregnant individual, but it's for the network of support as well. So we looked as a group and we came up with 3 different primary drivers. So the first primary driver, so in terms of drivers, what driver is, so what was the issue? So and we call it drivers to fit the research framework, if you wish. It was patient identification at a point of contact with midwives. Now, I don't know how kind of this works in Wales, but in Norfolk and most of the UK, midwives, they do not have access always to the patient's notes. So unless the person discloses, look, I have learning disabilities, they are unlikely to know. And from discussing with the midwife, sometimes it's really hard at the booking to understand whether the person requires more support. There are some opportunities for the person to disclose that they might need extra support. But sometimes, on occasions, the person doesn't always recognize the need, or secondly, if they are not at first pregnancy and they have children removed, they are more likely not to disclose it. So as a group, we discussed and agreed to introduce a tool to help midwives with early identification of the prospective parent with learning disabilities. And as such, we decided to use the NHS tool for identification. This was initially designed for GPs to help GPs to identify whether the person has extra needs. So this is not a diagnostic tool, but it's merely a tool to help the midwife understand whether the person may need extra support and complete a referral to the learning disability team if required. So it has two parts, and we really liked that it helps the midwife to actually think really hard whether the person has learning disabilities, and there's a lot of kind of prompts out there, as you can see, and I really like that. The factors that may indicate no learning disability, a diagnosis of ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and Asperger's. As you probably came across, there are a lot of misunderstanding whether the person has some learning difficulties like dyslexia and dyspraxia. They are often labeled by mainstream clinicians as having learning disabilities. And it's quite difficult. The reason why it's quite difficult is because they are not mutually exclusive. So you'll find people with learning disabilities that they may well have dyslexia, dyspraxia, or ADHD. Similarly, with autism, you may find people with intellectual disabilities having autism, but again, they're not mutually inclusive. So we really liked this tool because prompts the clinician to think really hard what sort of support the person in front of them may require. The second primary driver was education. So the midwives, they were really genuine, and despite the in-the-house training they have around learning disabilities, awareness about learning disabilities, actually to put that in practice, unless they obviously come across someone with maybe more moderate or even profound learning disabilities, could be quite difficult to understand if the person in front of them, they have learning disabilities. So they are very genuine about it and open. So we discussed that as part of the antenatal pathway, we are going to provide appropriate teaching sessions, and we're going to create a folder with useful resources, and we're going to work together when they might support people with learning disabilities. And as you can see, right on your right side, we have the measure, baseline, and follow-up knowledge. So I actually provided a teaching session not long ago. I've administered a baseline knowledge before the teaching, and then a follow-up questionnaire just to see whether the teaching had any effect, or whether more support was required. And the last primary driver was to ensure that we actually received these referrals to the learning disability team in a timely manner. And so we are to enable us to support both the client if they agree to, but also the midwifery services to ensure that the outcomes they are appropriate to, and the quality of care is there. How do we measure? So if you remember the box to the right hand of the previous slides, so we would use a PDSA cycle. So it's quite simple. You implement the change, then you kind of measure the outcomes, and if you see if it's working, you implement it, you adopt it. If it's not working, you abandon it, because that's what we do. Or sometimes it may just need a little adjustment, a little tweaking to make sure it's working. So this pathway won us the ICCHNR Research Award in December 2022, and I'm really proud. And further, I was awarded a grant to look at the sustainability of the pathway, and hopefully, my ambition is to see this rolled out nationally, but time will tell. In terms of what the do's and don'ts of perinatal care for women and birthing people with learning disabilities. This is more of a summary, really. It's allowing extra time for appointments with repeating the information when required, and making sure that you request the feedback from the person, provide the information in alternative forms, as I said, easy read, video, and so on and so forth. In Norfolk, we are using the folder from Change. So my pregnancy, my choice. It comes with, it's a over 400 pages of easy read information that supports the midwife to kind of pick the images and form the care plans and kind of adapt the if you wish, the clinic so the person feels supported and understands the information. Obviously, mental capacity, we are all working with the Mental Capacity Act, and we have to follow its principles. And also, it's a big ask to refer to specialist services, learning disability team, and to develop a multi-agency care plan. I can see in Wales a lot of good practice. Maybe unfortunately in the rest of UK, we're not as good. So we're quite fragmented. The services are quite fragmented. And because things change every 2 minutes, we have ICBs, ICS, and so on and so forth. And with the funding cuts, it's very important to work interagency, so to work along with other stakeholders. So in the Norfolk antenatal case, like midwives and social services. One of the biggest change that the pathway brought within Norfolk is the pressure for the learning disability team to allocate a nurse within 10 days from the referral, because obviously the pregnancy is quite short. In 9 months, so we need to make sure we take that opportunity and we support the person. I don't know how things are working in Wales, but in Norfolk and the rest of the country, there are some long waiters, not pregnant individuals, but in terms of requiring support because of shortage of staff, people might wait, I don't know, 3 months until they are allocated a learning disability nurse. Of course, for pregnant individuals, this is not desired. Hence, antenatal pathway puts that pressure on the agencies to provide timely support, not just support, but timely support. In terms of don'ts, obviously, we don't have to presume incapacity because the person has the learning disability. And probably you heard this before, diagnosis, overshadowing. Don't assume that if somebody has learning disabilities, they don't have, for example, mental health issues, or if somebody presents maybe anxious, don't always assume that's because they have learning disabilities. And please don't forget that people with learning disabilities, they can be amazing parents too. So, and we've seen a lot of case studies, and I was really pleased to hear from some of the previous speakers about some good practice as well. So what's next? Currently, I'm developing some work around perinatal mental health within the learning disability population. And I just came back from Helsinki, from the European Congress of Mental Health in Intellectual Disability, where I've presented my my new kind of research proposal in terms of identifying anxiety and depression in perinatal journey for people with learning disabilities. I'm also collaborating with professionals locally in developing resources under the Family Hub. Again, I'm not sure how the Wales model is in UK, the government offered some money to the local authorities to change what it used to be the Sure Start, to change it to the Family Hub, and we're working on some resources to ensure that the parents with learning disabilities needs are addressed. So this is me. Thank you so much for listening. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Anka. That was a fab. And again, I think we've heard a lot this morning. The key features of good practice. Right, communication is key. Ensuring we're leaving extra time, we're repeating information, and we're checking out and requesting feedback, and making sure people are understanding, involving learning disability colleagues as we need, and making sure information is in accessible forms. So it's just really interesting talking about, you referred to the overshadowing trap, so that we're not forgetting that if there is a person with a learning disabilities, they may have a mental health difficulty as well in the perinatal period. So I think that's really important. Any thoughts or questions from anybody? Any reflections? Come on, Anne-Marie, don't let me down, but don't let everybody else, don't let Anne-Marie put you off.
I was just thinking I'm going to be quiet this time because I overshadow everything. You know what I'm like.
Oh, no, not at all. Go on, Nicola.
Just thought it was really interesting with those questions around what may indicate a learning disability or not, as opposed to just asking a parent, do you have a learning disability? Just thought that was a really interesting, it just added that, just emphasised there's more complexity around it than sometimes a parent either be having a disability that's been recorded or diagnosed, but maybe a parent who has some of those difficulties without that necessarily being on any records or anything. So just thought that was really interesting, those questions.
Thank you, Nicola. So just for my curiosity, how things are working in Wales? Do you have access to the patient medical information? So do you already know when in the midwifery clinics, when you see a patient, do you already know their background information?
So you're inviting Anne-Marie to
yeah,
go on.
Much. Go on, Anne-Marie.
So no, I mean, historically, midwives have used different, I mean, we always use the handheld records, so, and they were introduced, I suppose, so that women could be involved in their documentation. But we've always used different systems to health visiting, different systems to GPs. You get specific midwives that work really well when they're embedded in a GP practice, and they can access sort of GP background and information as and when needed. But I think we're all really excited with the development of the All Wales digital platforms, really, in the hope that they promise that we can all use the same system and access all the same background, because I think it's really important, isn't it? Because we do rely on a lot of people presenting their backgrounds themselves, and very often women will keep certain things. I talk a lot about trauma informed and the rucksack of stuff that people carry. And you've really got to create this quite special opportunity for people to allow you in that rucksack and to see what their backgrounds are. And I think within services that are stretched, over understaffed, it can be difficult to allocate that time to build that connection so that women feel able to disclose things to you about, all sorts of things, their mental health background, their learning difficulties, the gender, all of these discussions, these vital discussions that frame the way that we can look after someone, are based on them self-disclosing. So hopefully the digital platform will make that different. Anybody jump in if I've said something wrong or that they understand something different, because that's just my thoughts on it, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think they were talking about a pathway for pregnancy, aren't we? But actually the principles of the development of that pathway could be in any of our services, aren't they? I don't know, we've got a few, I don't want to put people on the spot, but we've got a few specialist team lead colleagues here, or people from the specialist team. Does anybody want to comment or thoughts or? Come on, Rachel. Jane, I've spotted you. Don't let me down. Anything from anybody there? Or even from the morning?
That's absolutely okay. I presume that you maybe have less difficulties in identifying the prospective parent with learning disabilities. You have better systems. As I said, in Norfolk, midwives, they don't feel quite confident in recognizing a person with learning disabilities, especially if they have borderline. And coming back from Helsinki, I think would be quite interesting to know that Netherlands, they have, so as we all know, we have the IQ and it's split in 3, mild, moderate and profound. The Netherlands added a 4th one, borderline, that includes the IQ up to 85. So that's really interesting because, and it's quite, we don't know if that's labeling or that's enabling. So is that enabling the person on the borderline spectrum to get the support they need, or is that labeling the person with learning disability, if it makes sense? So yeah, that's food for thought for maybe future practice. Thank you again for having me. If you have any questions, please, I'm going to pop my email in the chat, and please do liaise with me. I'll be happy to have a chat.
I can see Martha's got her hand up there, Anka, before you go anywhere.
Yeah.
No, I was just reflecting really on the whole morning as well, and what you've just been discussing, Anka, because I feel, I mean, I think we talked about this maybe when we met previously, but I feel we've in the past maybe had some really good practice. We did used to ask parents if, you know, what school did they attend? Did they have any additional support in school? And that gave us a bit of an understanding where they might be at coming, you know, that transition into parenthood or after their babies are born. But it's been really encouraging to just hear the conversations this morning, because I think that's what it's done. It's kind of prompted people to think about how do we enable families to share some of these difficulties with us in an open way that we can plan and support them appropriately rather than discriminate against them, that they get the support that they need to be the best parents that they can be. So it's, but also identifying, you know, so your future research would be really interesting to see about how we identify perinatal mental health difficulties with parents with a learning difficulty, because I think sadly it's often missed, and that's where we need to do some more work. So thank you.
Thank you, Martha. Thank you for inviting me today. It was a real pleasure.
Lovely, thanks, Anka. Okay, so that's the morning finished. Any thoughts or any reflections on the morning? Otherwise, you're going to have a very nice long lunch break. Anything at all from anybody? You're all being very quiet today.
Everyone's dying for a cup of tea now, Sharon, isn't it?
Are they? Go to
I
the
just
toilet.
find it, I like the enabling versus labelling. So, you know, the way I embed education in Swansea is through individual case discussions with midwives, you know, as a way to sort of tease open the conversations that are relevant to cases. And that's definitely something I'm going to be using from now on, you know, because I ask a lot of questions of the midwives, like inquisitiveness questions, you know, when they bring cases forward, and I'm like, oh, I wonder if you thought about that, or what do you think about enabling or labeling, you know, and it just teases open that little box of tricks, doesn't it, and gets the midwife, and I know they go back into their practice with that query, and it changes the way they deliver. I always start every time I look after someone, I think the first opening question is how can I look after you today? You know, how can I speak to you? What can I do to make me being with you today easier? And then you revisit that at the end and say, is everything that we've discussed, you know, been suitable? Is there anything else we can pull in to make it more relevant? And I think just those very basic communication skills, isn't it, used with families, just opens that opportunity for them to say if there's something that hasn't quite resonated, or something that actually I didn't really get that question about fetal movements. You know, what do you mean by movement? And believe me, movements is something I talk about day in, day out with women. So, you know, it's all been really thought-provoking. So I've had a really great morning, but I get everybody really wants a cup of tea.
Okay, so we've got a few speakers this afternoon looking at research and also what's happening across Wales to support families. So you've got a bit of a break now. I'd like to say go for a walk, have a nice lunch, but you probably go straight onto your emails, whatever you're choosing to do and whatever helps you. We'll see you back here at 1 o'clock. Okay, take care. Take care.